And welcome back. How you doing, Rob?
I'm very good, Ash. Very good, thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us for part two of this interview. I'm just going to start. I do have I have a couple of questions that people have sent in. I got sent in quite a few questions, but I think most of them were answered in the first recording that we did. But I have a couple that I want to ask, just as a bit different. So one of the first questions I got asked to ask you is looking at you after playing and being a fan who regularly attends matches. What's it like for you on a match day if you're regularly getting sort of noticed or people that are recognizing you, especially sort of the older Fulham fans that recognize you? What's that's like? What is that like for you?
Like any fame, even though it's only small, I would say in the current climate of being an ex-footballer that's retired probably 30 odd years. I mean, I get recognised quite a lot. Golden Lion is a pub I frequent before I go to any Fulham game. Me and my son obviously go there, or me and Karen, or me and family members, depending who's coming down to games. It's home games, away games. Again, we meet up. We always find out which Fulham pub all the Fulham fans are going. In Manchester the other week, we went to the last game of the season. We went to a Fulham fan who owns a pub in Manchester, Pete Heffernan. We went to his pub, and there was hundreds of Fulham fans there. A lot of youngsters and a lot of people that wouldn't know me, but there's a lot of old gits, as I call it, that still get recognised. And lots of my son's mates who come to us now to come to games now and again. They're always like not taken back, but the amount of people that ask me for photos of sign this or sign that. It's I'm very privileged to get asked and stuff like that. Being 62 and retired a long time, but obviously in some of the older generation and even the older generation's kids, they've probably drilled into them that if they see me on the concourse at an away game or a home game or in a home Fulham pub or an away Fulham pub, it's I do get asked and I do get talked to quite regularly. But I would never turn anything down. I love it. I really like the attention. It's nice to get it at an older age, I would say.
Obviously, your name was one that was a lot of people came to me when I was talking about sort of getting in touch with some ex-players to interview. Your name was mentioned a lot by people that obviously wanted to hear from you, and obviously we spoke quite in depth in the first episode that we done, about Derby and Lincoln, which were a lot of the questions that I got sent in were about those games. So I feel like they've been answered. But one of the questions that has been sent in to me that I felt was quite funny, so it's why I wanted to ask you. And obviously, someone's heard an interview you've done before to know this as an answer, but people wanted to know what Tony Gale was like as a roommate or someone you'd have to knock about with quite a lot.
Well, if I could swear on this podcast, I would do, but I'd keep it quite polite. Then I'd just say he was a pain in the backside. He was the joker of the dressing room the whole time I were at Fulham, and probably still is afterwards. We meet up quite regularly. He was one of my best mates. I grew up with him over a couple of years behind him. Obviously, he was in the first team at 16, and as I came into the first team at 18, he would have been 20 and probably played 100, 150 games by then. And I had a very good relationship with him. And he was obviously from Pimlico and I were a Fulham lads. And so I knew his mum and dad well, and he knew all my family very well. So, so I grew up with him. But he still takes the Michael out of me now, especially when I come down to London with my northern accent. He absolutely lambasts me when we go out on ex-Fulham days out for a meal and that, and we'll be having one soon, I think in July or August. And he is the joker of the pack. And but he made me make the tea at night if we were doing rooming together the night before a game. I was the younger one, so I did all the running around for him. But on a personal note, he was a good friend, and we've been out on many nights and holidays together over the years, and still to this day, I speak to him probably once every couple of weeks. So, he's a good friend, but as a roommate, he was a pain.
Obviously, that's it in terms of questions I had for you, because I say most of the questions that I had, I felt we dealt with. And a couple of the questions that people have sent in were about sort of goals you scored and stuff like that, which I feel like we're probably going to hit on in the next part that we're about to do. Anyone who's sort of a regular in my show will know I like to do a section called Top Threes, where we sort of discuss fans, like top three favorite goals, kits, games, and moments and memories as a fan. And we discussed this. We've discussed it a bit. We're going to do things a little bit differently in the sense that I'm going to try to get sort of top three answers off of you as a fan and as a player, so that we can sort of have two different categories here for you. Because I think it'll be quite interesting to get a view from you about what was important to you as a player, and then obviously as a fan. So if we sort of start your top threes, the top threes section always starts with like your top three favorite goals. Can you sort of take us through like your top three favorite goals as a player and then as a fan, and we can sort of discuss them?
Yeah, can do. Well, as a player, I mean, there's one that I often talk to a lot of the older fans that I don't. Some of them would have been there. It was against Shrewsbury back in, I think it was 81-82 season, where it was a hot day and it was away. It was towards the end of the season. And I scored a goal, and I've been on to Shrewsbury Town to try and get footage of it and YouTube. I can't find nothing of the. No one's got anything of it, but it was the best goal I've ever scored in all my 75 goals I scored in my career throughout football. I picked the ball up from the halfway line. I could exaggerate this to say that I beat half the team, but it was I beat at least four players from halfway line towards it before I'd got. It was a bit like the Ricky Villa goal against Man City in the final. And I kept stumbling or skillfully beating players as I got towards the edge of the box, went round the last defender, the keeper came out. I was one for dummying keepers as well. Dummy the keeper. I've got a lovely picture of me just rolling it into the net, but that is it. Ken Cotton, bless his socks. I've got a picture of that last bit of just actually rolling it into net, but it doesn't show that I beat four players and the goalkeeper previously to that. And I've tried for many, many years. So if someone out there could get footage of that goal that I scored at Shrewsbury, I'd be indebted to him for life. But yeah, that was the best goal I ever scored. Other goals that come to mind in terms of playing wise, I scored an overhead kick against Man City, which again was one of my favourite goals from general play. And probably the third one was away at Newcastle with my left foot, which I didn't score many with my left foot, but it was I think it was a League Cup game. It was definitely Newcastle. I only watched it on the telly not so long ago, or on some footage on Facebook. I think that someone put a roundup of all my goals, and it came back. And I was watching it with my wife the other day, and she went, "Oh bloody hell, that was a good strike with your left foot." It was like on an angle, and it went top bin. So yeah, they're my three favourite goals in terms of slightly different in terms of context. As a fan, oh god, this was difficult. My favourite and best ever was Juventus, because I was in the Hammersmith end. I was actually in the night box just behind the goal to the right. Obviously Clint's goal. As we all know what it meant. And that night, I was there with my son, and we were right behind it, and we could see it as he chipped it, and it started to come down. You're just hoping that it's going to go in. And as I say, I was in one of them little boxes to the right of the Hammersmith end stand, and yeah, that was a famous night, as we all know. That we turned that result round to get through to the next round, and obviously go on to the final. Other two goals within Aston Villa at Wembley. Tom's goal again, even though he's a personal friend as in terms of family. Yeah, I'd flown back from Spain 2 days early from holiday. I made the wife come back. We flew into Gatwick. We were trying to get back, and then got the train up, and then dropped our bags off at Lily Road somewhere in an hotel. Got to Wembley, met up with all the family, 42 people. I'd managed to, well, most of them were Fulham fans, but some of them I had to get tickets for. David Daly told a story at the 1879 Club the other week that he got a call from the ticket office that time, and I wanted to buy 20 tickets for my family, and they thought I was a ticket tout. They didn't So David had to investigate me over the phone and said, "Willow, is it you? Are you sure? Is it? How do we know it's you? And you're not going to sell them on?" I said, "David, I want him from my mum, 85-year-old mum I was taking, my daughter, my grandsons, my son. We were all coming down. Well, they were all coming down from the north on the train, and the rest were meeting us at Wembley, which we all did. And for Tom to score that goal, it was memorable, as we all know. And the third goal, again, it's a playoff final. It's Joe Bryan's. I mean, Joe Bryan, and obviously he's just left us recently. And that free kick he scored, which was pre-planned because they'd watched the keeper in training in Brentford for many, many games in that season and saw that he was one that wanted to threaten a cross or a free kick from there. And you could see the kidology from Joe, from all the players that Joe knew what he was doing before he took that free kick, and whether it went in or not, he was going to try that cuteness of trying to make out he were knocking it to the far post, but he was always going to just bend it as hard and as technically possible to round the wall to skid into the off the surface into the goal. And he did it to a treat, and you could see his reaction running to Scott and the rest of the coaching staff, that a ploy that they'd worked on all week in training had suddenly come off. So I think Joe needs to be in my top three there of them goals.
Yeah, I think obviously we spoke about this before we came on. I can't really comment too much about the goals that you personally scored because I didn't see any of them. I've seen a few that have sort of popped up on, like the big match revisited and stuff like that. That might occasionally come up and stuff like that. So I can't really comment in terms of those goals,
Yeah, I mean
unfortunately.
the regular ones, Grimsby, Carlisle. I used to do my little jig when I scored and like hands up, and I celebrated goals quite well. If I didn't score myself, I was always first to Gordon or Dean or whatever I scored. I did celebrate goals quite. If you look at all the footage, I'm usually there. Little number 8 will be there. Congratulations, Dixie or Gailey or Ivor or whoever, Brownie in the old days. So yeah, I was. It meant that much to me because I was playing for my boyhood team, so every goal I celebrated like it could have been my last.
Yeah, I get that. And obviously, then talking about your club, your goals as a fan, it's quite funny because your top three goals are ones that regularly come up, and I think they come up very importantly. They come up, but the Clint Dempsey chip against Juventus is still to this day one of the most sort of one of those moments
Oh,
where
it's an
sort of time
iconic
stood
evening.
still.
Yeah, it's nice to tell the tale that you were there live to watch it, and that's what me and my son took out of that
Yeah,
night. And we do every time we talk to people, say, "Wow, we were there. We were one of
yeah,
20 odd thousand that saw the comeback, and to be behind that goal, literally standing on the railings from that little night box to the right of the Hammersmith end, and we're right behind
yeah.
it, and the way the
Well,
game had
I
gone."
was I was in the Hammersmith end behind the goal, slightly to if you're looking at the goal, slightly to the left of the goal. If you're in the crowd, you're on the right hand side of like I was H6, and I'd never sat down that low before because it was the only place I could get tickets for the game. And as soon as he chipped it, it felt like it took about a year and a half to go in. It
Yeah, yeah.
was
Well, like we
time
were doing like
stood
that. Yeah.
still. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was one of those where you just on the edge of your
You
seat,
just
sort of
wanted
like
to drop
it's got
underneath the
oh oh
crossbar.
yeah, praying it would. And when it did, it was absolutely like it was special. It's one of those moments in life that you'll never
Yeah,
forget it. And it's what it is true whenever people mention Fulham and they always go, oh, that Europa League run and oh, that Juventus game and stuff like that. Like the pleasure you get to speak about being at that game, it's just one of the most surreal sort of moments as a fan that you've had. The Hamburg was special in the sense that the Hamburg semi-final obviously was special in the sense that it was an occasion. But that comeback win against Juventus, and anyone who watched football regularly during the 90s, obviously I grew up watching uh, uh, Italian football on Sundays afternoons, and I idolized Juventus. I loved Juventus growing up. They were my Italian team. So, but obviously in this particular game, I was all about watching Fulham win and to beat a team that was good as them, and they were a really good team. It was pretty special. And obviously, your second goal is Tom's goal at Wembley, and I don't think there's ever going to be a Fulham fan ever that's going to argue about that being in their top three. Anyone who was at that final knows just how special of a goal it was and just what it meant to everyone as a fan. And
Yeah,
for Tom to score it, Tom, who is probably one of the most likable players that Fulham have had in a very long time. He's been a loyal player to Fulham for a very long time, and it was beautiful. And for him to score the way he scored, one, I don't think I've ever seen him do the overlapping run like that, and I was a bit shocked that he did. But he took it well. And if there was any player in that game that you could have chose to score a winning goal at Wembley, it was Tom Cairney, especially that season. The only other player you might have wanted to score the goal that day was probably Kevin McDonald, but he wasn't even on the pitch at that point. So
yeah,
for
yeah,
Tom to score was special, and it was. I don't know about you, but for me, it was one of those moments where I've always dreamed of watching Fulham play at Wembley, and I had never done it. Obviously, never done it in our lifetime to see Fulham do it. To score at Wembley was special, but to win at Wembley was just one of those. I think Tom will probably never ever have to buy a drink in Fulham ever because he gave so many people like literally the biggest joy they could have, other than
yeah.
winning an FA
Um,
Cup final. I don't think that's going to be beat. And then we go on to obviously your third goal, which is obviously Joe Bryant. And unluckily for Joe, the only reason why it's probably not seen as high as in high esteem as Tom's is because there were no fans at the game.
yeah,
But it was such a special goal, and I think it was to beat Brentford is always nice. It's a rivalry that's sort of steeped up in the last sort of 10 or so years. The Brentford one. To beat them in the cup final, especially playoff final, especially because they'd done the double over us in the league, and we just couldn't seem to get the better of them in the league around that time, was special. And as you say, the the brain on Joe, and we all know Joe's a smart guy, and the brain on him to have the vision to see it, even though they worked on it, and to put it off was just beautiful. And I think as a fan, as you because we're not at the stadium, you don't really get the angles as well from watching it on TV. I've seen it from a few different angles where it's just amazing, such a quality
mhm.
finish, and I think that he's another player that will probably be idolised for a very long time at Fulham because of that game, and he deserved it more than a lot of players deserve to be sort of recognised for it. He does deserve, and it's just a shame that obviously he's now left the club, but I think he's left
Yeah,
knowing
yeah.
that he is a
I
Fulham
actually,
legend,
I
and
actually came down on the train with my son and a couple of pals, and we all met up in a pub in Putney to watch the game that night with about 70, 80 other Fulham fans. We watched it on the telly, obviously, because we couldn't go to the game, and it was just surreal when it went in, and then a lot of the lads then went down to the cottage because obviously we'd got promoted, and there was everyone dancing and singing down by the cottage. We actually stayed in the pub and then went for something to eat afterwards, me and my son and a few pals. But yeah, it was had to be in London to watch the game, even though we couldn't go to Wembley. But we picked a pub in Fulham down Lower Richmond Road, I think it was. I can't remember the name of the pub. Pete Smith had sorted it out, but it was an unreal night when that goal went in. The cheers and the bouncing and dancing in the pub was, you had to be there to see it, and the same with the Wembley and Aston Villa. That white wall still brings tears to my eyes when I watch it. The highlights of that game. It was just walking down Wembley Way was just phenomenal, and it was a hot day, and it was just it was memorable in every sense.
yeah, it was very special. I think the white wall makes that the result obviously is amazing. The white wall is amazing for Fulham fans to manage to organise something like that and it actually work because we're quite well known for not even being able to choreograph songs to be sang at the same time. It's pretty impressive, and it was, as you say, yeah. I always get goosebumps whenever I think about the white wall. In fact, I've got some photos that I need to put up in my new like area here that I've set up at home, and one of those is of the white wall because it is one of those photos that just all the memories and all the sort of the feelings and emotions of that day are always brought back when I look at that picture. And I think that to a man, every Fulham fan sort of I think everyone did the club proud that day. The players amazing, but as fans, I think we did really, really well that day as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
We'll move on to your second set of top threes. and I know this one's a bit hard as a player because you played in a period where sort of shirts didn't change that often. But look at your top three kits now. If you have some as a player, that'd be great. But let us know your your top three favorite fun kits.
Well, as I've discussed off air, but I wasn't really a kit person. I like the kits that we played in. I mean, the white one with the black shoulders of the 82-83 season was, and you still see lots of fans wearing it now, going around the concourses. As I said earlier, kits in my day were complete. We would probably keep the same design kit maybe for 2 seasons, and we may not have even had sponsors in them days. Or going through the second part of my career, it was when we were struggling, we probably didn't have any. But yeah, I mean, the new kits nowadays, I mean, obviously my grandson, he's always going to the club shop wanting the new kits every season, and my son and his Christmas list will usually be some kind of Fulham kit or shorts or socks or whatever. I think obviously they're a lot more shaped, a lot more different, and we've had many over the last sort of 20, 30 years. But yeah, I like the red one, even though we used to do the white one with the black. The red I've seen us play in Newcastle away the other week. It was on when we won 4-1 when Ray and Gordon got 2 goals in the the goal of the month competition. I always like the red kit in that as well, the red with the black shoulders or epaulets. I wouldn't call it that because it's more than that. But yeah, in terms of watching the teams, I'm not one for taking too much notice of what kit. It doesn't bother me. It's the person that's in the kit that's more important than what the kit is to me now. I'm watching it, but I enjoyed wearing a couple of kits that, as I said, as a player, they would be my favourites. And I've got a couple of framed ones in my office. So
Yeah, I completely understand. Not everyone's sort of into kits like everybody else is. I understand that in terms of the playing ones, the black the white with the black top, and the red with the black sort of tops, are kits that even I have seen many times. I think it's because growing up, there were still fans that wore those kits regularly, like into night. As you say, you see them a lot more now because wearing retro kits has become a lot more
yeah.
fashionable than it ever was. But that red kit, I do remember that red kit quite well, and I think it's probably because I've seen highlights of that Newcastle game a lot. Because obviously it's one of those games that was always on like the big match revisited and stuff like that. That always used to
Yeah.
come on. You always see highlights of it, and so I've seen that kit a lot. And I used to think that kit was quite nice. And I am
Yeah,
one of
and
those
the
people
only
that
other kit I liked really, and as I went as a fan, even though I was only probably 14, obviously, I always liked seeing the pictures of Mullery and Moore wearing a 75 kit at Wembley. It just looks classy on them. It looks classy on Bobby Moore and Alan Mullery, even though we didn't win that game and I went as a 14-year-old. But yeah, I like that concept, which was a bit old school, you know what I mean? It was 70s type look. And again, over the years, I've seen some supporters wearing that type of that year of a kit, 75 or even into George and Marsh's years of 76, 77 season.
yeah, and obviously that FA Cup kit. I have a version of that FA Cup kit. I think everyone does. I think my little brother who's 21 has a version of that FA Cup final kit. Obviously, they often come out as sort of remakes and stuff, and they
Yeah.
are very plain but very nice. And I think that one of the things when it comes to like Fulham shirts, one of the things I always like about home shirts, especially, is the plainer the better. I love a clean kit, and I
Mm.
think that those sort of cover that. But I understand that you're not like one of those people that are really into kits and stuff. That it's not it wouldn't be sort of your thing. We'll move on to the set. This is the top three that I'm most looking forward to speaking to you about as an ex-player, and as a fan. Is your top three sort of favorite games? So take us through your top three favorite games.
Well, obviously, my first one would have to be my debut. For those that may have been there back in 1980 in January, when I was an 18-year-old, and we briefly discussed it on part one. But yeah, it's got to be one of my favourite games because it was my first time representing my boyhood club, and which I went on to make 252 games. So yeah, Blackburn away in January of 1980 would be my number one because it was a privilege to be selected to to play for the club and managed to go on and play so many games. My second one, no surprise, and it's up there. Probably be my number one, but I'd have to go number one because it was number two, because as an 18-year-old you probably have to say that has to start your career. You wouldn't have got to number two. Is Lincoln at home. That's the most memorable night I've ever had in my career, both as a Fulham player and as in the rest of my other clubs that I represented over the years. But yeah, that night will, as we briefly discussed in part one, would live with me forever, both on the pitch afterwards, the build up. Very, very memorable to see probably 25 to 27,000 Fulham fans just making the cottage and making the whole three other sides of the ground absolutely rocking. And then my third one, it was difficult, the third one, because again, it's got to be something memorable. But again, I Newcastle away in that, and I've only watched it recently, in the 4-1 way, to actually play in a team that played the fluent football we did, and to get 2 goals, and I had a little bit of a part in one in Gordon's goal. That was always up there. People often say to me, wow, that Newcastle game when we destroyed them 4-1, and Ray and Gordon got 2 goals that were up in the selection for goal of the month or whatever. It may have been a London version, not a first division version. But yeah, that was special, because even the Newcastle fans, because Malcolm being the manager, they stood there and applauded us off the pitch, for 40 odd thousand Geordies when they just got beat 4-1 at home, that you'd expect them to boo, because Malcolm was in, seeing us off the pitch and being the ex-player he was there. It was a pleasant surprise to get clapped off, because they knew they'd been beaten by a very good footballing side that actually played them off the park. So yeah, so them 3 games as a player. As a fan, it's not going to be too different in terms of what we've already discussed. I mean, obviously, I can't put in 1, 2, and 3, because I'm not brave enough to say what was my best night out of all of them, or best day out of all of them, because they were all as good as each other. But definitely Juventus, as we touched on there, that night was memorable, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it, thinking, and when we were stood behind that goal in the corner, and the travel down, and we stayed overnight, and we stayed at my mum's. But yeah, celebration afterwards went on for a couple of hours easy into the night after the game, because we got invited to the players' bar afterwards, because we were privileged to get into there. So yeah, it was a very memorable night. Again, it's not going to be no surprise, because we've touched on it. The journey for getting back from Spain, that we had to drive. Me and my wife had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We had to drive, because we were actually staying in Majaca. We wasn't in our property in Spain, in near Marbella. We were actually in Majaca at another place, and we couldn't get a flight directly back to Gatwick to get to London, to Wembley, on the Saturday, which we were not meant to come back till Monday. But so we had to drive for like 3 hours all the way to Alicante. And then we turned up at the wrong airport. With the sat nav took us to the old Alicante airport. So we just got to the airport in time, dropped the car off. We're running through. My wife's never run as fast. We were running through, sort of just to nearly missed our flight to get to Gatwick. And then we got the express up to follow up to London, and then, as I say, we were staying in a hotel, Lily Hotel down Lily Road. I think we just dropped our bags in there, and we jumped on the tube and met hundreds of Fulham fans. And as you well know, it was a very hot day that day. And that game that'll live with me, from getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning in Spain and getting back. And it was quite interesting. After the game, we all went back on the tube at Wembley. We went back to the Golden Line, because secretly my wife is a Liverpool fan, and they were playing the Champions League final that night. So we got back to the Golden Line, and then we met some friends, and then my son and all my family, we all met together, and we watched the Liverpool game, obviously, that night. And then, if you remember, I don't know if you did, but we were actually walking about 12 o'clock, and it absolutely poured it down. And we were in like shorts, flip-flops, and a white shirt I was wearing. And then we was heading towards New Kings Road to my mum's at sort of Sullivan Court, and we were stopping via Gibbad Kid, as you normally do when you stay in Fulham. But it was torrential rain and couldn't get a taxi with no buses coming past. It was gone past midnight. So that was a 4 o'clock in the morning to get into bed. I think 1 o'clock in the morning at my mum's the next day. That's memorable in many, many senses, really. But the game itself, obviously, as we've touched on, was I couldn't stop crying after the game. And then to have my mum there was first time she'd been to Wembley. She was 83. My daughter had looked after her during the game. She was sitting behind us, and it was just so nice to have them all there to see us finally get over the line. So yeah, they're the two. I didn't really pick a third game as a fan because there's too many to mention, and I'm gonna rest on my top two and think, right, they're the two that mean so much to me. I could make one up for three, but I don't see no point. I just think there's too many other games that are sort of borderline. So I'm going to stick 3 as a player and 2 as a fan.
Yeah, well, I'll discuss your 2 as a fan, obviously, quickly, because we've already been over them. And obviously, one of the things I love most about my show is that I've spoken to, a good few people now, and we always like one of the things I love most about speaking to people about Wembley is hearing their stories about people they shared that day with. And I think even for me, who, I go to football every week with, there's 5 of us with my cousins, my brother, we all sit near each other in the Hammersmith end, and we get to share football every week. But that was one of the first times in a very long time where like my uncles come and like my cousin's dad come, and younger cousins come and older people come, and it was so special to share that day with everyone. And it's the same as you, obviously, clearly with your mum being there, and then like your wider family being there, and having so many people there to share the day, just made it so much more special. And I do openly remember when the full-time whistle went, I cried for about 15 minutes. And I was crying because obviously I was so happy that we'd won and we were back in the Premier League, and we were going for that. But I was actually crying because I was thinking of one of my aunties, who's one of the major reasons why I'm a Fulham fan. She took us to games when we were kids, because because she was the family member who loved the club so much, and she'd passed away a couple of years beforehand and didn't make it, but it was so special. And I think that a lot of us share a lot of connections with that. And one of the things that I found out, obviously, through talking to people, is that just how special that day was because of that. And then obviously the Juventus game is just it. How to say, we've already spoke about it. It's one of those wild games as a fan that it's one of those that I don't think the best storytellers in the world could write that story of that whole high, and how amazing it was. So that is as special as that is. But I want to discuss a little bit more about obviously your 3 games as a player, because I know we briefly spoke about your debut, and you had to and having to sort of mark the Blackburn player manager and stuff like that. But what was that like in terms of the feeling for you as playing for like your boyhood club? Because I know we didn't really touch on the job you had to do that day, but what was the sort of internal feeling in terms of like playing for your club?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of absolute pride, really. As I said, for an 18-year-old to be, initially 2 years before that to get a scholarship or apprenticeship, as it would have been called in them days, was a feather in my cap and my family's to get, because there were lots of schoolboy, all of us that were in the same team. Not all of us got selected for that sort of 2-year apprenticeship, and I was privileged enough. There was enough talent there that the scouts and managers or whoever made decisions that actually let me be one of, I think it was 5 or 6 of us that signed at the time. And even when we got to pro, there was only 2 of us that signed pro out of them 5 or 6 after the 2-year apprenticeship. So there must have been a bit of talent there or something there that they thought that, I could go on and have some kind of career for Fulham. And then, obviously, 18, 2 years later, then to get that opportunity, as I expressed in part 1, when Bobby Campbell told me, on the Friday that before we got on the coach to travel to Blackburn, that, tell your mum and dad that you are starting tomorrow. So if they want to get the train or coach up, then they better start arranging it. So, which was quickly trying to hastily arrange travel to make sure that they got there, you know, through my brothers, and fortunately my dad was worked on a train, so we got cheap train travel, so it was fairly easy to go London to Manchester and then to Blackburn, or I don't know what route they went, but my brothers made sure that they got up there to see me make my debut on a cold, horrible early Saturday, and in 4th or 5th of January, just after the New Year, was difficult for them. But yeah, so that was clearly, really, as a boy, I didn't really get too much nerves because I didn't have too much time to think about it. Even though he told me on the Friday, I wasn't a nervous kid as such. I just, you know, playing with the type of players that were in the squad at the time, it was just an eye opener. It was just I was still in sort of apprentice mode, you know what I mean? I was the one that had to get the teas or the coffees on the coach, or they treated me like I was still an apprentice, really, in a joking way. They'd just say, "Willow, go and get us a tea or a coffee." So walk to the back of the coach and then bring it down, or get 1 foot gaffer, or even the bus driver. It might have been Alan in them days. He must say, "Get me one while you're there." So yeah, actually morning of the game and that game itself, yeah, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was freezing, and I just, as I said in part one, I didn't want to be known just for doing a man marking job on Howard Kendall. I wanted to try and stamp my own authority when we did have the ball, and try and do as best I could to make sure I sort of linked in with the rest of the team play and format that Bobby had set out that day, to make sure that we got a result, which we drew 0-0 to get them back to Cottage the following Tuesday, which we overturned and we won the game. So yeah, that day as a memorable, but is definitely still up there as number one.
Yeah, and also we spoke about the Lincoln game in depth in the first half, because it's one of those games that, you know, your playing time at Fulham is most synonymous with, and how special that is, and how famous, you know, the photos of the celebrations afterwards were and stuff like that. So we don't really need to speak about that too much in terms of the actual game. But the Newcastle game, anyone who hasn't seen the highlights of it, that game is on YouTube. For sure, I know I've definitely seen it on there. They should watch it, because it is one of those. It is one of those games that when people, your older sort of family, tell you about, you know, the football that Fulham like to think is in our DNA and we like to play. It is a prime example of, you know, that passing, attacking, fluent football that we love to think that we play. And it
Yeah,
is absolutely, it is one of those games that we did score two amazing goals that day. But the football itself, considering, you know, what pitches were in the 80s, it's beautiful football to watch. And
yeah. The
I
one and
do
two
suggest
touch
people watch
that
it.
Ray Alford introduced as a coach, and you know, into my game, as it's called now, third man running. It was just he was just so far ahead of coaching, and was unbelievable, you know. And I'll say we were well known for the 1 and 2 touch football we played, and making sure that we got up the pitch in playing that way. We didn't go back to front too often, although we could do if we wanted to. I mean, it's no different than today's game, other than, you know, it's 30 or 40 years ago that it was a bit, it was say, when the pitches we were playing on was more difficult to play 1 and 2 touch, because you'd need your first touch to get it under control, because it was that bobbly or sandy. Your second touch might be a pass, whereas today you can play one touch. And you know, I bet if we went through some of the goals of 81 to 83, them 2 seasons, you could probably pick out tens and tens of goals where it might have been back to front with lovely fluent passing movements, and ended up with Gordon scoring it more times than not. A great goal, but in them days you didn't have the TV coverage that we've endured over the last sort of 20 or 30 years. So we're probably not seeing the real recognition that some of the lads or that team really deserve over them 2 years.
I'll say it's funny you should say that. One of the things that when I was growing up, that I talk about my auntie, one of the things that she always just told about us about football, because she was a passionate football fan, was, you know, how beautiful the football is that Fulham played. She always used to tell us that, you know, the quality sometimes was lacking, the player was sometimes lacking, but the style and the way that we like to play was always sort of the same. And obviously she said she was quite proud of that fact. I think it's one of those things that for her as a older Fulham fan, used to take a lot of pride in the fact that we might go down swinging, but we go down playing the right way. So I think it's one of those things that if anyone who hasn't watched, I do fully suggest they go and check out, especially that Newcastle game on YouTube, because it's a
Yeah.
wonderful watch. It is a wonderful watch. We're going to move on to your last set of top threes, which is your top three favorite moments and memories. Now, these don't have to be matches; they can be sort of any moments around the club as a fan, as a player. For you, I don't. I'd like to know what your sort of your top moments were as a player and as a fan, because I think it might be quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as much as I don't like repeating myself, some of them will probably, a little bit of both. Traveling around the country as a player and as a fan. As a fan, I would say, bringing my son up as a Fulham fan, and he's 34 today, and he's probably been at my side for the last sort of 25 years of watching Fulham home and away, and being in Krakow, being in Portugal last summer pre-season watching. We've travelled the country and Europe watching games. Him being he came north with me when he was one, and at 33 years later, he's still managed to be a staunch Fulham fan. And looking at the fixtures, he's rung me today and looking at the fixtures and trying to plan train travel and this and that already. But obviously, we'll have to hold fire until. So for him, for a personal point of view, watching Fulham is to have him and obviously my wife, even though she's a secret Liverpool fan. She loves coming to Fulham games, come to more Fulham games this season than I ever known. Obviously, work permitting, because she works at weekends and depending on games, but she manages to get to a lot of the games, especially in the north of England, if we're just an hour or two away, not so much the London games. So yeah, other highlights as a player, as I said earlier, and I don't want to repeat myself, to be selected to play for your home club, and there isn't many that have done that, and touched on Johnny Haynes, and I'm sure some fans out there will rattle off plenty of other names, and there is plenty of other, but I'm not going to put myself in the same sort of format as Johnny Haynes. But just be born and bred in Fulham, and then to play for Fulham and still have an affinity with Fulham, 50 odd years later, because I'm 62 now, and I was 12 when I started doing schoolboys, and then 14 when I was going to schoolboy forms. It's still a no mean feat in my eyes, and that's why probably I get a lot of respect from especially the older generation of Fulham fans that watch me grow up, because I'm one that I can't imagine many of the last 10, 15 years of players do what I did in the last sort of 40 years of watching Fulham home and away. Maybe they will be. They might shock me, but and we briefly discussed, once you play and represent Fulham, there's a lot of an affinity there as a club. If you've had 1 year there or 10 years there, it's the type of club with the people behind the scenes that make you feel wanted, and as a family, unless you've had a falling out with a manager and for whatever reason you have gripes against Fulham, it might be against the manager rather than the club. You can't but love Fulham Football Club, because it's in an iconic place in Fulham. You that walk from Putney Bridge, from down the river through the park is just iconic, and that I always love doing that every time I go, and you just walk through and you see the smiles on everyone's faces, and every away fan you talk to, I've never seen any trouble. I must have missed a few bits, but never seen him, more times than not, never see any trouble. The away fans that come just love coming to Fulham and the pubs and Putney, and all the big teams take their full allocations, as they do probably both in Championship and now Premiership. And it's just a good day out. And it all stems around the results. Obviously, it's great when we win, and we've seen lots of ups and downs over the years, both as a player and as a fan. We've seen the rough with the smooth, and you still look. I couldn't wait for today's fixtures to come out and think, right, who are we going to get? Can you try and plan weekends, holidays, this, that? Well, I'll make sure obviously, as we discussed earlier, Sky permitting, BT committing, you try and plan your whole season 9 months around what you want to do or what games you're not been to. So yeah, that's in the DNA, I think, of being a player and as a fan now, as I've been for many years. So in terms of personal memories, there's lots and lots, and they're all, as I've said earlier, as a player and as a fan, they're sort of they'll be very similar, because as a player, it was obviously just playing and interacting with members of staff, grounds people, the lady in the canteens and all that. It was just an affinity that you had. Now as a fan, the chats and conversations I have with people in pubs and concourses and trains, buses, planes, it's just the same. You know what I mean? It's just nice, and I don't want that to go away, because I enjoy it. I like talking to people, because it makes them probably feel good as well, as much as it's good for me. There's no barriers or whatever. I'll stop and talk to anyone about any game, good or bad, any situation, good or bad, any photos, any signatures on the weirdest of equipment or shirts or whatever. So yeah, I enjoy actually being associated with being an ex-player and a current fan, and then memories and moments will live with me till the day I die.
Yeah, I think that you said something that we touch on quite a lot in this show, and it's the sort of family, not just the family feeling around the club, because as fans, we have that family feel around the club. There's many fans that I've grown up knowing on the terraces. We come from different backgrounds, different areas, different sort of different everything, but you get that sort of strong bond, especially going to games, and there's people that you don't see for years, and then you sort of bump in them to randomly at an away game, and it's just like you've never really been apart and stuff like that, and that's kind of special. But one of the things you did here on is obviously going to games with your son, and stuff like that. And I'm very lucky that I've had that experience with my daughter. My daughter's 10, and she is in the season ticket holder the coming season, because she's going to stage school now, and she'd rather do that than come to football, which is that's her quip. Although she has sort of hinted that she would like to get a season ticket to go watch the ladies team play on Sundays, which is kind of cool. I'm glad that she's into that. She has a passion for it. My little boy, who's he's free, he hasn't been to a game yet, but I really look forward to doing that. And most of my memories growing up as a fan that I love, the feeling that you love the most is actually not even necessarily the games of football that are in front of you, but it's the people around you. And for someone like yourself, obviously, that people are going to want to speak to a lot, and because obviously you've been a part of the team, on the pitch, as well as sort of as a fan off of it, I imagine that is extremely special, and it's something that most of us can only sort of dream of, having that sort of connection as a player, as a fan. And one of the things that say that a lot of people, when I put out there, obviously I wanted to speak to some ex-players and get their feelings on the club. A lot of people, your name was one of the ones that was mentioned to me sort of more than anyone's, really, because there were so many people that thought, like, he's not just a fan, but you're a well-liked person. I think there's a lot of people that are really excited about it. And I think even from people that have watched part one of this so far, or listened to it, and I've had a lot of feedback from people that are really happy to sort of hear your story. So I think that's wonderful, and the feeling around the club is quite mutual with you as it is with the other way around, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and yeah, all the comments and the positives that you're getting back through the video, through the podcast and the show. Fantastic. But it's only it's the truth. It's you're telling my side of a story as a player and as a fan, and it is no different. It will continue for many years. So long may it continue.
Cool. We're going to do one last thing. It's my favourite thing to always end every episode on, which is the FFC Cult Hero Hall of Fame. You would have heard me mention in the first episode that you have been inducted into the Cult Hero Hall of Fame. You were inducted by Stuart Roberts a couple of episodes ago. And Stuart is another one of those older heads of the Fulham fan that he had so many stories to tell that we had to do his story as a two double header because I didn't want to cut anything he had to say. But before we sort of go into the Cult Hero Hall of Fame, and you're going to give me a couple of Cult Hero Hall of Fame entries, one as a fan and one as a player. I wanted just to show you a video that Stuart had sent me, just to send to you, and I hope that hopefully everyone will enjoy it. If you give me 1 second, I'm just trying to get it up. Here it is. So hopefully this should play.
Filming this from the Queen Mary 2. As you know, I inducted you into the Hall of Fame for Ash, and just wanted to say that you're a top man, and I really enjoy watching you playing. And now, obviously, you're a fan, and just, you know, top Fulham supporter now, so more than deserved.
Obviously, that was sent in by Stu, who inducted you, because when he found out you were coming on, he wanted us to send that to you.
I'm very, very privileged, Stuart, for induct me as your Hall of Fame. I appreciate that, and yeah, nice of you to send us a little clip there while you're enjoying your cruise and whatever. But yeah, really appreciate that, both as a player and as a fan, and thank you very much.
Obviously, we're going to get your entrance into the Cult Hall of Fame, and you're sort of going to give us your reasons why you're inducting those people. But Rob, give us your inductees into the Cult Hero Hall of Fame.
Okay, well, as a player, I'm going to do my first one. And it's not favoritism, and it's not because he was one of my best mates growing up, but I think Tony Gale should be introduced to the Cult Hero of Fame. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, he was a couple of years older than me. So when he made his debut as the up-and-coming Bobby Moore, he'd obviously worked and played or trained with Bobby in the 75. Tony was probably made his debut in 77. 77-ish, or maybe a little bit before. I don't know when his actual date of his debut was, but it was after. I'm sure it was after Bobby had just left us. But yeah, him very similar story to mine. Not localish, being a Plimnico lad, coming through the youth teams, playing in the youth team probably at 14 and 15. He was so far ahead of himself in terms of technical ability. I was very surprised that he never went on to make played for England under 18s, maybe 21s, but never, at that time, there was so many good centre halves around it. I think he never got the full cap that he should have probably deserved. Had the pleasure of playing with him all through the 80s till 85, or just before 85, when he was probably the first to depart of the so-called good team that we had in them 2 years. He had the opportunity to go and move and better himself at West Ham at the time, which he thought. Obviously went on to have a very successful career there, play another 10 years there, have a testimonial, and went on to get a Premiership winning medal at Blackburn on the back end of his career, working under Ray Harford with Kenny Dalglish. So he'd gone to, similar to me when I went to Luton. Ray signed him as a backup player for Blackburn, and he played many games, and he managed to get a Premiership winning medal out of it, which will be sitting on his mantelpiece somewhere nicely, unless he's sold it already. But yeah, I think as much as he's a pundit now for Sky for many, many years, and there is the odd Fulham fan out there that often say to me that, you know, they always say, "Oh, Tony Gale, yeah, he's a Chelsea fan," but he's not really. He's deep down, he loves Fulham. He has to commentate on them. He writes in our program, so the club must see something in him as a pundit as well as an ex-player, and he wouldn't be as fan as like I am, because he hadn't got the time to do what I do. But yeah, I still think, as from football ability, he has to go into the Hall of Fame for a 16-year-old to naturally go in to play. And I don't know how many hundreds of games he played before he eventually left to go to West Ham, but he definitely was way ahead of his time at that time. He just lacked that little bit of pace, but he didn't need to. He could see a pass. He was an Alan Hansen-ish or Bobby Moore-ish from a Fulham point of view. But, you know, in terms of that time, there was Hansen, Lawrenson, but Gailey was so good on the ball, We're one step of everyone in terms of looking to see where his next pass, whether or his next defensive move might make. But yeah, I would put him in my Hall of Fame as my player side of it. In terms of a fan, I'm probably going to be a bit. Well, I don't know. I'll say this may not be biased, but in Tom Cairney, I see a little bit of myself, not as a player, but as a person who's been at the club 9 years and put a lot of effort, both with it personally and his family. Even though he's from the north, he's adjusted to life in Fulham, and obviously promotion, relegation, got the captaincy, injuries. We all undoubtedly technical ability is, he makes Fulham a better team especially when we were in the Championship. Obviously in the Premiership, he's had some ups and downs in terms of this season's been difficult to get a regular place, but he's still got 5 Man of the Match awards. He's still played 35 games. Nearly every game he's come on for 20 minutes, 25, 15 or whatever, and done enough in them sort of situations to either get us over the line, keep the ball, or make a goal, stop a goal. I think the amount of games he's played and the goals he's scored and the situations he's been in, both good and bad for Fulham, I see a little bit of that in myself. That he's a Fulham man, even though he's a reverse. He's a northerner that have come south. I'm a southerner that have ended up coming north. I still keep I keep in contact with him. I keep in contact with his family. So I still think Tom for what he's done for Fulham already. And probably still do, because he's still got plenty of years left in him in the locker. I still think he should be, from my point of view, Tom Cairney is my cult hero for Hall of Fame.
I'll go over those now. As a fan and putting Tom Cairney in, there's no arguments. There can be no arguments to it. Tom is
My only
literally
surprise is he's not been put in already. When I
there's
looked
been
at
a few people. There's been a few people that have questioned it, and there's been a couple of people that have picked people that because they no longer play for the club, and there's been people because he still plays for the club, they didn't quite want to pick him, but his name is mentioned regularly. And Tom, I love Tom, and I think there's many Fulham fans who love Tom, not just because of Wembley and the goal at Wembley, and obviously that will cement him down in Fulham history, but because of how loyal he's been, and we know that he's grown so much as a footballer at Fulham, and he's so well liked at the club by everyone, fans alike. One of the funny things about Tom is that me and Tom actually share a birthday. My birthday's on 20th of January, just like his is, and my daughter loves Tom. Like, Tom Cairney is the player that she loves the most, and every year on my birthday, before she tells me happy birthday, she'll remind me it's Tom Cairney's birthday. She does it every year. So, I do love Tom, and I think Tom is he's more than deserved to be in there. And I'm hoping that Tom might be the first player in a long time who's going to earn a testimonial at the club, because it is fully deserved. And I've heard him say a few times in interviews that when he retires, he does plan, Fulham and the club that he'll probably end up taking his sons to go watch games at. And I'd love that to be the case, because he is one of those people that he's just really likable. You don't really hear any bad stories about Tom. We know that he has a reputation of being quite slick and loves his cars and loves his hair and stuff like that. But you don't really hear any bad stories about him. And I think that is one of those things that can only ever be a positive about a player and as a man. And I think that he's one of those people that he has embodied Fulham over the last sort of 8-9 years more than any other player, I think.
And he just got married last Saturday, so
he did, yeah. So he
all the footage and all that.
Yeah, he deserves a lot of congratulations for that as well, because he seems to punch a lot above his weight in the wife departments as well as he does on the football pitch. So, congratulations to him, and we wish him nothing but the best, no matter what happens to him football wise. But I'd love for him to end his career as a Fulham player, and stay around for a long time, because he's a great guy. And in terms of your sort of as a player, Tony Gale. Now, Tony Gale is an interesting one, because I I really like Tony Gale. I've always really liked Tony Gale, but for me, my mum and dad got divorced when I was a kid, and my dad moved to Essex, and I grew up in sort of going to on Fulham away game days that we weren't going. I'd go to my dad's house, and a lot of people around there, obviously massive West Ham fans. So I used to have a lot of conversations with people about Tony. When obviously people find out I'm a Fulham fan, they go, "Oh yes," they obviously Tony Gale was the link between the two clubs that was most sort of recent for them, and they would speak about it. So I used to hear about his ability a lot. And again, he's another one of those people that he's really really likable, isn't he? Like he always talks well about the club. He always gives in. I know I've heard people mention the fact that he's a Chelsea boy, but I don't really think that's a thing. You know, I think it's one of those things that he's always shown Fulham a lot of love. He's always shown Fulham, you know, he always speaks really highly about us. And for someone who obviously went on and played so many games for West Ham and is a legend at West Ham, he deserves to be a legend at Fulham as well, because it's where he started. It's where he still gives a lot of time and effort towards. You say he still writes for the program notes. He's always really, really conscious when he's commentating on our games. You can always really tell that he's there to make sure that he stops people when people sort of put out those old cliches about Fulham. He's always there to add some actual interesting input rather than just sort of
He's,
spill out the old
he's quite
cliches.
comical on there. He's quite one-liners. He's quite good as a a backup to the main commentator. He'll always have a little quirk which is in his locker to. But yeah, all them stories of Chelsea and obviously West Ham. He's a legend, but he still started his career like me as a 14, 15-year-old and was happy, lucky to make his debut at 16, long before me at 18. That he went on to play 200-300 games or whatever, and so you can't deny the first 5 years of his footballing career, 16 to 21, before he went to West Ham, that was his grounding, and that was where he was brought up, and so I even though he's not a testimonial or a 10-year type player, I still think he gave a lot to Fulham, and he still gives a lot indirectly in a partial sort of commentating media pundit type way.
Yeah, but I think he's fully deserved, and he's one of those people that I've always wanted to have conversation. I've never met him, unfortunately. A funny story about Tony is that I got married at Kingswood Golf Club in Surrey, and I think he had been there like the day or two before my wedding for the Bobby Moore charity day. They had like a golf event, and he'd been there, and his photo was. They had the photo of him being there, and I woke up on the day of my wedding to see a photo of him at the golf club that I was about to go get married out there. So sort of always one of those things that just missed him. It would have been lovely to have had got a
I'll
sneaky
try and get him on here
conversation
for
with
you.
him. I'd love to have him on because he is an absolute Fulham legend, and I think that it does say testament to him as a man, that as a footballer, that for someone who left at 21. He is still spoken quite highly of by a lot of Fulham fans. Still, they still really appreciate even what he went on to do at West Ham. And you can't argue that he made the right decision going to West Ham, because obviously he spent an awful lot of time playing in, the higher division in the Premier League as well because of that move. So you can't argue that that's where he needed to be. He much more deserves to be playing in the Premier League for West Ham than playing in the fourth division.
Rather than the second and third division that we were sort of languishing at the time,
Yeah, you can't argue that case. So.
But I think if we'd got promoted that year after as we harped on part one, I think if we'd have gone up that year, I think he'd have stayed another couple of years, So who knows?
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's sliding doors. Who knows what would have happened? But
correct.
Rob, thank you very much for giving me your time. I really appreciate it over these two recordings. It's been really interesting to get your input and hear about you as a fan, as a player. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming up.
That's a pleasure. My pleasure. Definitely. I loved it.